stunt like that, and they're looking at serial reaction times. And there's clearly two processes that are illustrated in this waveform. One is a linear process. Reaction times are getting slower, obviously, as you would expect over time without sleep. There's also a significant variability with actually an increasing amplitude. So this is negative, and this is worse performance, better performance. And the worst performance is happening in the morning. So that's between 3 and 9 a.m. approximately in the morning, with best performance being in the evening. So there's a time of day variation which is maintained even under conditions of sleep loss. In fact, it's magnified in sleep loss. There's one study that was published by Riley in the UK, and this is a group that's done a lot of work on chronobiology in sports. They did one football-specific assessment. It was a study in which it was a repeated measure study with something on the order of 15 or 20 subjects, I believe, that were tested at different times of day, 8, 12, 16, and 2000 hours, but on different days in counterbalanced order. And they were looking at things like body temperature peak, and that was peaking in the evening, and then alertness, fatigue, reaction times, grip strength, forward flexion, juggling, wall volley, and dribbling. And in this experiment, they all had significant time of day variability, again with peaks in the evening and late afternoon, with the exception of fatigue, which was maximal in the morning, as you'd expect at 8 o'clock in the morning. Which seems counterintuitive, doesn't it, that you would say that fatigue would be maximal at the time of day after you've just woken up. But that actually is paradoxically true. The highest levels of fatigue are normally closer to the time of body temperature minimum. And there's also this thing known as sleep inertia. So for a period of time, anywhere between 30 minutes and an hour after you've slept, measures of alertness and fatigue are actually higher, and that wears off. And that's a direct consequence of the brain transitioning out of the sleep state. And you can detect that after sleep at any time of day. It's particularly bad when you're woken up around the time of body temperature minimum. That's when.
So can I so that would speak to, if athletes take a nap,
yes,
it's really important that they time it properly, is that right?
Absolutely. That's a very good question, and absolutely. In the area of shift work, one of the issues is, should we allow shift workers to have naps? And it's verboten in many places, and in other places in other countries, mainly in Japan, for example, they build naps into the schedule. In North America, you can be fired for taking a nap on the job. But naps it's a double-edged sword. I mean, if you're essentially non-functional, you're not fit for duty, then you might as well tell somebody to go in the corner over there and close your eyes for a while and just keep out of the way. But you can't expect that person's performance is going to be significantly better when they wake up from that nap, depending on the length of the nap. In fact, longer naps are going to be worse, especially around body temperature minimum. So overnight napping, paradoxically, the measures of cognitive performance after the nap, if it's happening at night in the shift worker, their performance will be worse after the nap than it was before. So for athletes, a nap is more likely to happen in the afternoon. The recommendation is that the nap should end no later than 2 hours before match time. And I would say that would be in a sense, cutting it close.
What about the length of the nap?
That's definitely also going to matter. The longer the nap, the greater the sleep inertia. So I'm a 20-minute napper, and I really don't have any sleep inertia with a 20-minute nap. I wake up feeling pretty refreshed. But if I was to fall asleep for an hour, then that can set me back substantially. I have a hard time waking up from that. It's going to interact with a lot of things. It's going to interact with time of day. It's going to interact with your recent sleep-wake history, how much sleep debt you're carrying. If you're getting a reasonable amount of sleep and you want to take a pre-game nap, it's good to have it several hours before the match. So, time of day effects. Most performance variables are going to track the body temperature cycle. So there's going to be an evening peak in performance and a morning trough. Optimal performance zone is going to be somewhere between 8 and 18. It's going to span 8 to 18 hours after the body temperature minimum, which would make, for the average person, that would correspond to local times of noon to 10 p.m. It falls off rapidly after that. So with maximal, actually, best performance is probably the 6 to 8 p.m. Time. And there's a few measures, like I mentioned, that have been shown in some studies to have a morning advantage. So with that as a background, you can define these best performance zones. So for evening games in the West Coast, so this would be Pacific Standard Time, the West Coast team is going to be in its best performance zone. The East Coast team is going to be outside of its best zone. It's already a team that's coming from 3 hours of difference is already going to be outside of its best zone. And so the West Coast team is going to have an advantage for evening games. For afternoon games on Pacific Standard Time, the West and East Coast teams are pretty much both within their best zones, so there's no West Coast advantage for afternoon games against Eastern teams. For evening games in the Eastern Standard Time, the West Coast team is in its best zone. It's 3 hours early there, so you've got an evening game at 8 o'clock in the evening, let's say, 7 o'clock in the evening, well, that's 4 or 5 o'clock in Vancouver time. If you're still on Vancouver time biologically, you're in your best performance zone. East Coast team is doing okay as well. And this is a question on some of my exams for the students. I ask them which team has the advantage. If the game goes into overtime, if Vancouver's playing Detroit or Montreal in Stanley Cup Finals, there's a fantasy for Montreal fans. And the game goes into triple overtime, and the it's in Montreal and started at 8 o'clock in the evening or 7:30 in the evening. The game goes into triple overtime, and both teams have just come from Vancouver. Well, let's say both teams haven't come to Vancouver. Montreal's been in Montreal. Vancouver comes to Montreal, they play. And it goes into overtime. Who's at advantage? It's not the traveling team. The traveling team is still in its, it's still on, biologically, is on Vancouver time. It's still in its optimal zone. The Montreal team is now starting to fall off. It's out of its optimal zone. It's heading into this, it's approaching the so-called sleep gate, when it's very easy to fall asleep, 11, 12 o'clock in the evening. So for very late games, Vancouver starts to have the advantage. Afternoon games at Eastern Standard Time, the West Coast team is starting to approach its best zone, but it can be early. The later in the afternoon the game is, the better. A noon game, Eastern time or 1 o'clock time, that's not great. That's 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning out here, and that's outside of your normal maximal competition time. You're not going to be used to playing at that time. But biologically, you're also not going to be as prepared to play at that time. So the West Coast team has a disadvantage for afternoon games on Eastern time. So the strategies then would be that you can implement to deal with this is before the season. I don't know does the team have much input in game scheduling? With this knowledge, what you want to do is you want to have evening games when you're playing the East Coast teams. When you're playing the West Coast teams and Central Zone teams, not as big a deal. Obviously, with the West Coast teams, chronobiology is not an issue. But all those games that you play against any team that lives in Eastern time zones, any time zone east of us, you want to ask the league, don't tell them why, you just want to tell the league that, oh, for these, well, I guess you can't do that, can you? You can't tell them when you want to have games against a certain team schedule. But you could say that we want to have as many evening games as possible. I don't know if that fits well for marketing. The team does better in the stands for afternoon versus evening. West Coast teams are an advantage playing in the evening. So that would be a preseason strategy. But within the season, for East Coast evening games, the best strategy is to avoid shifting your rhythms. You want to live on Western time. So when you're traveling east, and it's a short trip, and it's within North America, so we're talking 3 time zones here, and there's no reason to shift your rhythms. What you want to do is you want to just maintain your Pacific Standard Time schedule. That includes sleep and meals, practice, light exposure. Yep.
It's a short time, we're talking 2 or 3 days, or it could be up to a week.
Well, if it's a single game, well, if you can maintain Pacific Standard Time throughout an entire road trip back east, that's to your advantage. At least as far as the games, and if the games are being played in the evening. If you have a lot of afternoon games, then it may be beneficial to actually try to advance your clock a little bit, just so that the game times aren't falling in what would be the morning time, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning.
So can I just, so if, let's say you played at 6 o'clock back east,
Yeah.
so you'd have dinner at 3?
That I can't tell you. I don't know enough about what you athletes do as far as pregame.
But would that be the best strategy to try to, if you would eat at 6 o'clock in Vancouver?
Yeah.
We would have a pregame meal 4 hours,
4 hours.
Yeah.
so ideal would be
2.
2 o'clock versus.
Yeah.
Yeah. You would have dinner after the game.
Yeah.
That's what I would do.
And then you're recommending sleeping in 11 o'clock, which would be 8 o'clock.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's what you guys are doing now. If you have.
We haven't had any sort of game.
Yeah.
Last year, we did not do that.
Pardon me?
Last year, we did not do that. We were having breakfast
You were
at 8:30 East Coast time.
You were working on local time. I would not do that. I would work on Pacific Standard Time. Unless you're going back east for a long period of time, and if you're going to be there for a couple of weeks at a training camp or something, then by all means, adjust to Eastern Time. If you're going back there for the specific purpose of playing 1 game or 2 games, I would stay on Pacific Time, unless the games are being scheduled early in the afternoon. And then I would say it's probably not a bad idea if you take steps to phase advance your circadian cycle so that you find it easier to get up early, move your body temperature rhythm forward a little bit. Yep.
Question is, when you fly, let's say, use 2 different examples. Let's say first a 3-hour time difference and second a 10-hour time difference to Europe or further.
Yeah.
How long does it take you to adjust the clock in terms of your biorhythms coming back to the